that we need to approach this as a family approaches it, and don't place all of the burden on the vulnerable, not placing all the burden on children, older citizens, and those who sometimes don't have a voice in Washington. Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
From Arizona.
In a few minutes, we're going to be voting on the continuing resolution, which our House colleagues are voting on literally as we speak here. And I wish to address that very briefly. But first, I must comment on at least one thing that my colleague from Pennsylvania just said. He was critical of the Ryan budget, but does not appear to have read the Ryan budget. I believe that because I know he wouldn't deliberately mischaracterize it. But he's wrong in several respects, and I'll just cite one example. He said that the Ryan budget would end Medicare as we know it, and that millions of seniors would be directly affected. That's simply not true, unless you count as a senior somebody that's 50 or 53 or 4 years old. The Ryan budget does not affect anyone above the age of 54 with respect to Medicare. It says if you have Medicare and you're 55 or older, nothing changes for you. All we do is provide premium support for those age 54 and below. So it's simply incorrect to say that millions of seniors would be directly affected by the Ryan budget with respect to their Medicare coverage. Well, let me go back to the point of our discussion right now. As I said, we'll be voting very soon on the continuing resolution. This is the final continuing resolution, we can finally say, for the fiscal year 2011 that funds the government for the rest of this fiscal year. And it does mark the end of a long and hard-fought process. I am pleased that we've been able to cut billions of dollars from the federal government and avoid a government shutdown. It's true that $38 billion in spending cuts represents a tiny fraction of the federal budget, and it's less than many of us would have liked. But those who have been critical of the deal, saying that it doesn't go far enough, I think, should keep 3 points in mind. First of all, our fiscal problems were not created in a day, and they won't be solved in one budget. But this is a good start. It's a little bit like the weight that I've put on. It took me a long time to add these 10 or 12 extra pounds, and I'm not going to get them off overnight. It's going to take me time to get them off. The budget agreement begins a process that's critical to beginning the reduction of our deficit and debt. The agreement will enact the largest non-defense spending cut in dollar terms in American history. Just months after President Obama asked Congress for a spending freeze that would have provided no cuts whatsoever. The Wall Street Journal points out, and I'm quoting now, domestic discretionary spending grew by 6% in 2008, 11% in 2009, and 14% in 2010. But this year will fall by 4%. That's no small reversal, they say, and I believe they're correct. Secondly, no one got everything they wanted. Some wanted more in cuts, some wanted less. I would have preferred we cut more. But this was the best deal that we could get that could pass both chambers of the Congress and be signed by the President. Third, this debate has altered the conversation about spending, and that's a good thing. As columnist William McGurn wrote Wednesday, during the budget negotiations, Speaker Boehner helped change the national debate over spending from stimulus and investment to how much spending we need to cut, which is why the President pressed the reset button in his speech this week on spending and debt. We have changed the fight from how much money we're going to spend on stimulus to how much we're going to cut from this and future budgets. And once the final 2011 budget passes and we move on to the much larger discussion about the 2012 budget, we'll be talking not about saving billions, but about saving trillions of dollars. The problem, as we all know, is a $14 trillion debt, with a large amount of that owned by China and by other foreign countries. It also represents over $53 trillion in unfunded liabilities. In May, our nation's expected to hit its debt ceiling, and the President has asked us to increase that ceiling. Senate Republicans and House Republicans, and I believe many Democrats as well, have said that in order to raise the debt ceiling, we need to do something significant about the debt and about constraining future spending. The longer we wait, the worse the problems will get. They're exacerbated over time. And we're not going to raise the debt ceiling without ensuring that we don't have to keep on doing it in the future. Raising taxes, as the President proposed, will not be helpful in this process. It's disappointing that the only specific proposal that the President laid out in his speech yesterday was, in fact, this call for higher taxes. Speaker Boehner has said that raising taxes is a non-starter, and I imagine the vast majority of Senate Republicans will take that position as well. Most Americans do not believe that we're overtaxed, but that Washington has a spending problem. I'll briefly go over a few of the better ideas our conference has been discussing, which I think could attract support from both sides of the aisle. First is a balanced budget amendment, which all Senate Republicans have co-sponsored. This should not serve as a means to raise taxes, but as a mechanism to ensure that the federal government has to live within its means each year, just as most American families do. Second, I believe there is strong support in the Republican caucus for a constitutional spending limitation at 18% of the gross domestic product. Why 18%? Because that's roughly equal to the revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product over the last 40 years. And 18% spending limit would stop Washington from spending more than it takes in each year. And third, and I'm glad to see the presiding officer in the chair, while I pass on a compliment, Senators Corker and McCaskill have sponsored the Commitment to American Prosperity Act, known as the CAP Act. I strongly support their legislation. It would cap both mandatory and discretionary spending and put all government spending on the table. Beginning in 2013, the CAP Act would establish federal spending limits that would, over 10 years, reduce spending to 20.6% of the gross domestic product. And that's the average of the last 40 years. To reduce any gamesmanship, the bill codifies a definition for emergency spending. I know some of my colleagues on this side of the aisle would like to see even more dramatic reductions as a part of the CAP Act. I'll note that the Corker-McCaskill proposal is responsible and mainstream, and it could hopefully attract a good deal of support from both sides of the aisle. Over in the House of Representatives, there are also some good ideas. Budget Committee Paul Ryan has been a leader on fiscal issues, and that chamber will soon consider his budget plan for the next fiscal year. Chairman Ryan believes this blueprint could reverse Washington's trend of spending beyond its means and passing the debt on to our children and grandchildren. And I believe he's on target. His budget reflects the kind of difficult and politically unpopular choices that lawmakers will need to make in order to do something about our unsustainable spending and debt. And perhaps that's why Democrat Erskine Bowles, head of the President Deficit Commission, praised the Ryan budget as a serious, honest, and straightforward approach, end of quote. Notably, Mr. Bowles and his co-chairman Alan Simpson said that the President's budget doesn't go nearly far enough in addressing the nation's fiscal challenges. Chairman Ryan's budget would return federal spending, specifically what is known as non-defense discretionary spending, to 2008 levels. That's the level before the massive spending unleashed by the Obama administration. Spending cuts proposed in Ryan's budget total $5.8 trillion over 10 years. In a recent article, John Taylor, an economics professor at Stanford, Gary Becker, a Nobel Prize winner, and George Shultz, a former Secretary of Labor, Treasury, and State, wrote, and I'm quoting, "Credible actions that reduce the rapid growth of federal spending and debt will raise economic growth and lower the unemployment rate," end of quote. And then they said again, higher private investment, not more government purchases, is the surest way to increase prosperity, end of quote. So, Madam President, reducing government spending can increase economic productivity and jobs. President Obama has sought to stimulate the economy and create jobs by spending trillions of government dollars. What's that gotten us? Record deficits, excess borrowing, about 40 cents of every dollar that the government now spends will have to be borrowed, and it's gotten us stubbornly high unemployment. Chairman Ryan's budget also calls for tax reform through sensible and growth-promoting policies. The budget contemplates a top tax rate of 25% for individuals and businesses. Currently, the tax rate on business is 35%, the highest of all of the countries in the developed world. That rate, by the way, discourages investment. It discourages job creation and makes America an expensive place in which to do business. In fact, it encourages business to move overseas, their operations overseas, something that all of us are very concerned about. What we need are solutions that emphasize the strength of American entrepreneurs and our private sector, not the government, to spur the economy and help put people back to work. In the debates ahead, I hope we can engage in serious discussions about how to take on our fiscal problems in a responsible way, to bring down the cost of government, boost our economy, and promote economic growth. That's what Americans are looking for, and it's what our country needs.
Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, I rise to make a parliamentary inquiry. The Senate will soon receive from the House legislation to fund the federal government for the rest of this year, H.R. 1473. Normally, spending bills like this one go through the Appropriations Committee. Despite the fact that this spending bill that the Senate will soon take up covers funding for the entire federal government, including all appropriations bills for the year, this spending bill never was even considered by the House or Senate Appropriations Committee. Mr. President, snuck into this massive spending bill are legislative provisions that typically are not allowed by Senate rules to be included in the appropriations process. The Senate has a rule, Rule 16, that prohibits Senate legislative amendments to an appropriations bill. Despite this Senate rule, the spending bill the Senate will consider today includes provisions that are clearly legislative in nature. Specifically, I'm referring to Section 1858 of the spending bill, which repeals free choice vouchers from the Affordable Care Act that became law last year. There should be no doubt that repealing a law or part of a law is legislating. In this case, Section 1858 repeals part of the Internal Revenue Code. Amending the Internal Revenue Code is general legislation, not the appropriation of funds. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office has actually determined that free choice vouchers involve no appropriation of funds whatsoever. So, Mr. President, my parliamentary inquiry is whether repealing free choice vouchers in the spending bill the Senate will soon consider is legislating on an appropriations bill.
The chair is advised that repealing any law is legislative in nature, and repealing a law in an appropriations bill is legislating on an appropriations bill.
Madam President, I thank you for making this very clear that repealing free choice vouchers, the opportunity to come up with a marketplace-oriented approach for people in a health care no man's land in this spending bill is clearly legislating on an appropriations bill, and that is not the way the United States Senate traditionally does business. If this provision was brought up in the United States Senate, we now know it would be ruled out of order. It would be ruled out of order because in the United States Senate, we simply do not legislate on appropriations bill. The United States Senate doesn't legislate on appropriations bill for a simple reason. Every United States senator knows that it would be open season for the special interest lobbyists all over this town. Now, the administration and this body took a stand earlier this year against earmarking, something that you're very much aware of, Madam President. And I'd like to quote from the President's State of the Union address. The President said, "The American people deserve to know that the special interests aren't larding up legislation with pet projects. Both parties in Congress should know this," said the President. "If a bill comes to my desk with earmarks inside it, I will veto it." Madam President, I would like to have somebody explain the difference between letting a lobbyist slip an earmark into an appropriations bill and slipping legislative language into an appropriations bill that benefits a whole array of special interest lobbies. It sure seems to have the same effect to me. Now, I'm not certain who proposed eliminating free choice vouchers in this appropriations deal. Maybe a lobbyist asked for it, or maybe some staffer with special interest sympathies saw an opportunity to send the lobbyist what one lobbyist called today, and I quote, an early Easter gift. But either way, I know with 100% certainty that this decision was not made with the public interest in mind. The American people are not the ones that benefit from eliminating free choice vouchers. The American people like the idea of being able to have choices for their health care. Choices, I would point out, that are much like the ones we have as members of Congress. And the fact is, this is one provision in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that combined the thinking of colleagues on both sides of the aisle, Democrats who want to expand coverage, Republicans who have an interest in choice and competition. This was one provision that provided a concrete path to holding down health care costs, and it has now been gutted by the special interests. Now, some special interests are arguing that in some way free choice vouchers would in some way harm employer-based health coverage. Madam President, what we know for certain is for the group of people who could access a free choice voucher, the employer-based health system is dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional for them. For the group of people who are covered by free choice vouchers, folks who aren't eligible for the exchanges, folks who aren't eligible for subsidies, right now they have only two choices: coverage that is completely unavailable or coverage that is completely unaffordable. The chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, at a time that free choice vouchers was accepted, specifically talked about how this filled a gap in the bill. And now, with it gone, more than 300,000 Americans aren't going to have a path to affordable, good quality coverage. And Madam President, free choice vouchers were needed at the time we worked on the Affordable Care Act, and they are even more necessary today. For example, the Kaiser Family Foundation, in their most recent analysis, has demonstrated how consistently, again and again, more health care costs are being shifted onto the backs of American workers. In their most recent analysis, Madam President, they found that employee health expenses in the last year had gone up 14%, and the employee was eating almost all of that. Almost all of it was being shifted onto the backs of the workers. So this was important today. It was important when we moved originally to enact the legislation. It is even more important today. And the fact is, these individuals are only looking for another path because the system doesn't work for them. If it worked for them, we wouldn't even have an issue. But as the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee pointed out, this is a gap in the system, a gap that had we been able to sustain free choice vouchers and stop the lobbyists from stripping them out, we would have had a way to ensure that hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hardworking Americans, these are folks who work at jobs, would still be able to go to sleep at night knowing that they had decent, good quality, affordable coverage for themselves and their families. Madam President, the United States Senate doesn't legislate on appropriations bills because, as the President said so appropriately, we should be working to rebuild people's faith in the institution of government. And we do not slip legislative language into these kinds of bills that benefits a few special interest groups at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Americans. This is not the way we do business. Throughout 2009, I promised my constituents that I wouldn't support health care reforms unless they were real reforms. Well, this legislation lets special interest groups take real reform out of the health care law. It seems to me that all over this town, the special interest groups are looking at the bill, and they're saying now it's going to be possible if we can just find behind closed doors some allies to take away real cost containment, real opportunities for good quality, affordable coverage for people. This legislation takes real reform out of the health care law. And because I keep my promises, Madam President, I will not support it. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor. And I would note the absence.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from New York.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Well, thank you, Madam President. And the last 2 weeks, I think, have been very good weeks for this country and this Congress. We are passing a continuing resolution, and funding the government and not letting the government close makes a great deal of sense, and I very much think that was to the better. And even more importantly, Madam President, we now will have a significant debate over the next few months about what this country should be like over the next several decades. And that is very important for our country, and it's what we should be doing. I salute Congressman Ryan for laying a vision out on the table, and Speaker Boehner for supporting it. I disagree with that vision, but they did have the forthrightness and the directness to put their views on the floor. And it is a different vision than what America is today. I also salute President Obama. He joined the issue yesterday clearly, without obfuscation, directly, and showed in the many places where he differed with Congressman Ryan. He laid out a different vision as to where America should go. And in a minute I will discuss my views of those visions, but I want to say this at the outset. It's very good to have this debate. I hope this will be a month or two. There'll be invective, and there'll be clashes, but I hope at the end of the day that the debate between the Republican vision of where America should go and the Democratic vision, between Congressman Ryan and President Obama, will be one of those times when historians will look back and say this is a place where America, through its Congress and its President, chose a direction. That's, after all, why we're here. We have many different issues to consider, but the role of government, what it should do and what it should not, is probably the most important for the next several decades. And the fact that the issue has been joined by Congressman Ryan on the one hand and President Obama on the other can only be good for America. And what we will do is come to a conclusion, hopefully in the next month or two. So, let me give you my views of those two visions. Yesterday, President Obama delivered a thoughtful, inspired speech about the need to rein in our out-of-control deficit. He called for a comprehensive approach, including cuts to defense and mandatory spending, and he rightfully put revenue on the table. His is a serious plan, one that would reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over the next 12 years. As only a president can do, he powerfully framed a debate that will likely continue to rage, certainly for the next several months and probably over the next year and a half, long after we resolve the debt ceiling. This is a debate that the American people want to have. It is a debate Democrats are ready and eager to engage in. It is a debate we believe we will win. We have the high ground. The House Republican plan puts the middle class last instead of first. It will never, ever pass the Senate, and we know the American people will reject it as well. The debate we just concluded, the debate about the CR, was about spending levels. The debate ahead of us is about more than spending levels. It's about the role of government itself. House Republicans aren't trying to balance the budget, no. They are trying to fundamentally alter Americans' relationship with their government. They believe that the message of the last election was that Americans wanted a dramatic change, a great limitation in how much the government should do. It is our view, as Democrats, that the American people gave us two messages. First, deal with the deficit. There is too much spending. And I say as a party, we ignore that message at our peril, but we have not ignored that message, neither in the CR nor in the President's proposal. But the American people sent a second message as loudly and as strongly as the first, and that is grow the economy, help the middle class continue to have better lives as they have over the last 5 decades, make sure there are meaningful jobs here in America. I believe a budget that reflects the American people's view has to do both these things. Reduce the deficit, but keep that American dream brightly burning. The American dream that the American middle class holds, which says the odds are quite good that we'll be doing better 10 years from today than we're doing now, and the odds are better still that our children will do better than us. That is what we believe the American people told us to do. And we believe that the budget revealed by Congressman Ryan and supported by Republicans is not what the American people want. It is a negative, pessimistic message. It is a message that says the great days of America are over. And we don't believe it is what the people want. And as we go through this debate, we shall see how that comes out. I believe we will prevail. The Republican budget, unveiled last week by Chairman Ryan, is on closer inspection not a really serious document. The pundits and political handicappers may have hailed it as a bold, daring approach to the fiscal challenges facing our country. But a closer examination reveals that Ryan's budget used exactly to his party's orthodoxy. It doesn't gore a single Republican ox. The House Republican budget puts the entire burden of reducing the deficit on seniors, students, and middle-class families. At the same time, it protects corporate welfare for oil companies, gives giant new tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, and leaves Pentagon spending almost completely untouched. Consider what Paul Ryan wants to do to Medicare. His plan ends Medicare as we know it and replaces it with a private voucher system that would cut benefits. Seniors would be left to fend for themselves with no guarantee of affordable coverage. They'd have to pay thousands of dollars more out of their pocket. As this chart shows, Madam President, under the current Medicare system, the average senior on Medicare in 2022 will contribute about 25% of the cost of their health care. But under the Ryan plan, seniors would have to pay 68% of the cost of coverage themselves, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. That's an outrageous burden. Simply put, it would drive many seniors into poverty. This generation of seniors, the first generation that was able to say they could retire and not go to bed every night sweating about how they were going to pay for health care if they or their spouse got an illness, would be the last generation to do so under Paul Ryan's vision. In America, we have said we have bounty, and some of that bounty should go to those in their golden years, to those who worked hard and who built the country and raised the families and fought the wars, that they should not have to worry that they could not afford health care if, God forbid, an illness, a serious illness afflicted them. The Ryan budget turns its back on that vision. Republicans have been patting themselves on the back recently for tackling entitlement reform. But their approach is nothing more than a rigid, ideological quest to unravel the social safety net. Medicare certainly has cost issues, but a better way to protect and preserve Medicare for future generations is to cut out the waste and inefficiency that everyone knows exists, not to privatize the program. Our plan is simple when it comes to Medicare. Mend it, don't end it. In the health care reform law, we made a good down payment on this effort. We began to shift Medicare and the larger health care system from an expensive fee-for-service model towards a system that pays providers for episodes of care. The truth is, when it comes to reining in the costs of Medicare, the President did it first, and he did it better. We Democrats are willing to build off that law. We can make further reforms to the delivery system. It needs further reforms, and we will further drive down the costs. The Ryan budget reverses progress we've already made, and in doing so, reopens the donut hole, further burdening seniors' budgets. Now, it's bad enough that the Ryan budget ends Medicare as we know it and increases costs for seniors. But just as egregious is what Ryan proposes to do with all the money he takes from seniors on Medicare. As this second chart shows, and as the President said yesterday, House Republicans want to give millionaires a new tax cut of $200,000. To pay for it, it would make 33 seniors each pay $6,000 more for health care. What kind of vision is that? The Ryan budget uses Medicare cuts to reduce the tax rate on millionaires and billionaires to 25% from 35%. That's the lowest level since 1931, when Herbert Hoover was president. The Ryan budget reduces taxes on the rich to the lowest level since 1931, the Hoover era, the era of the Great Depression. Madam President, I have nothing against the rich, God bless them. Many of them are living the American dream. They're what many of us aspire to be. But in order to keep that dream alive and get our country on firmer fiscal footing, we need a little shared sacrifice. Democrats want to work with Republicans to get our fiscal house in order. But we believe the best way to do it is to end the millionaire's tax break, not cut Medicare benefits. Let me be clear. A grand bargain on long-term deficit reduction is next to impossible unless we look at raising revenue. Unfortunately, Republican leaders are already trying to rule out revenue. If the other side refuses to even consider savings in the tax code, they will lose credibility with the American people. We simply cannot balance the budget by focusing solely on domestic discretionary spending, a narrow 12% slice of the budget. Cancer research and Head Start did not create our current deficit problem, and we won't fix it by going after cancer research and Head Start. Thankfully, many rank-and-file Republicans seem to agree with the need to put revenue on the table. The senator from Oklahoma, true fiscal conservative, said a blanket defense of all tax cuts is profoundly misguided. My Republican friend from Nebraska said Republicans need to keep an open mind and keep everything on the table, including revenue. My Republican friend from Georgia has said revenue, along with entitlement cuts, should be part of the budget compromise. My friend from Tennessee, who I work with closely on the Rules Committee, said that tax subsidies for big oil, quote, may be too expensive, unquote. As you can see, Madam President, many of my colleagues are prepared to tackle this challenge with, to use the phrase of the Republican senator from Nebraska, an open mind. The bottom line is, any budget that leaves defense and revenue off the table is ultimately untenable. Indeed, a dollar cut from defense spending reduces the deficit just as much as a dollar cut from domestic discretionary spending. And while there is certainly waste in the domestic discretionary side of the budget, there is also certainly waste on the defense side. And while we're certainly open to compromise, Democrats will not tolerate the House Republican budget's assault on Medicare. It isn't fair, it isn't right, and it will never, never pass the Senate. I'm hopeful that both parties in both chambers of Congress will come together to reach a reasonable, responsible deficit deal. But in order to do that, Republican leaders need to take off their ideological straitjackets. They can start by going to the drafting room and coming up with a fairer, more broad-based proposal than the Ryan budget. In conclusion, Madam President, Speaker Boehner needed Democrats to pass this year's budget, and he'll need Democrats to pass a long-term deficit reduction plan as well. The sooner he abandons the Tea Party, the sooner we can have a compromise. We hope the coming debate will yield a sound, serious deal. Madam President, that is our hope. That is our wish. And that is what the next few months are about. If it doesn't, we Democrats will have to take this contrast of priorities into 2012. We know in that battle, too, we will have the high ground. Thank you, Madam President. I thank my colleagues, and I yield the floor.
Madam President. Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, I see my distinguished colleagues, Senator from the senior senator from Hawaii and the senior senator from Mississippi, the leaders of our Appropriations Committee on the floor, and I just asked I might be able to continue for 2 or 3 minutes before the... Thank you. Madam President, I appreciate the extremely hard work that the Majority Leader, and I've told him this, and the President, I've told him that, our distinguished Chairman, I've told him that the work they've done to get the best possible deal under extremely difficult circumstances. Notwithstanding that, with the final resolution, I will not be able to vote for it, as I assume others in the Vermont delegation will not. I'm afraid that it creates a Faustian bargain. It averts a government shutdown at the expense of our overall national interest. This year, Congress spent most of its time negotiating 3 rounds of deeper and deeper cuts in the current year's budget, an exercise in oftentimes misguided wheel spinning, which ignores the fact that discretionary spending is but a relative fraction of the overall budget, while addresses some of the most pressing and urgent needs of ordinary Americans. Advocates paint this agreement in moral terms. I agree with them on that. Budgets are about our real priorities. And there's so much in this budget packet that is inconsistent with basic Vermont and American values. Drastic cuts to anti-hunger programs for low-income women and children, elimination of Vermont's weatherization program, cuts to economic development programs that grow jobs in my state of Vermont are not my idea of prudent sacrifices. It is no moral credit to Congress to cut vouchers for homeless Vermont veterans who served their country honorably. Nor does Congress cover itself in glory to deny first-generation Vermonters help in going to college because of cuts to the TRIO program. Is it a moral good to eliminate housing counseling for low-income families facing foreclosure, or to slash small stipends for seniors who are on Meals on Wheels? I estimate that these cuts in my little state range as high as $150 million. Tremendous burden at a time we face the worst time since the Great Depression. Now, the reason we're here, as a column pointed out very well in our national papers yesterday, is because even though we had an agreement to pass an omnibus bill last December, the last minute, those on the other side of the aisle who had agreed on that reneged, and of course we were not able to get the 60 votes necessary in the Senate. I had supported that omnibus budget bill even though there was enormous cuts in it. It would have enacted tens of billions of dollars in carefully drawn, reasonable reductions below the White House budget proposal. The distinguished senator from Hawaii had worked very hard and encouraged us to make cut after cut after cut, and we all agreed with him. I agreed with him. It was in the omnibus. And if that had been passed, we wouldn't be here. But because those who had agreed to support it changed their mind at the last minute, it killed the omnibus bill. It forced the Congress into a series of stopgap funding bills, and now into a slapdash continuing resolution. In addition to the cuts in the omnibus bill, I also supported reductions of billions more. And I voted for billions of dollars of cuts in short-term reductions in the continuing resolutions earlier this year. Now, some who tout this round of cuts as the most important and as the largest cuts of discretionary spending in history are the same ones who pushed through hundreds of billions of dollars of tax cuts to companies that ship jobs overseas, American jobs overseas, greatly adding to the profits of our oil companies who are now charging us $4 a gallon for gas and more. Pushed through for multi-millionaires, many of whom said they didn't want the tax cut. Pushed it through nonetheless. And the correlation between those spending cuts and those unfunded tax cuts is direct. It's unflattering to the proponents of both initiatives. And frankly, Madam President, I'm tired of being lectured on fiscal sanity from those who voted for an unnecessary war in Iraq, saying that that is because of 9/11, even though, as we know from every single report that has come out, Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. But we spent $1 trillion, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of other people's lives in Iraq, and then for the first time in the history of this country, instead of paying for a war, as we always have in the past, we say, oh no, we'll borrow the money. And by the way, we'll give you a tax cut too. So who paid for that war in Iraq? The men and women who valiantly fought there and their families who waited, wondering if they would come back alive, broken, or dead, and often were given the worst and grimmest news. They're the only ones who sacrificed. Everybody else got a tax cut, and we borrowed the money from China and everywhere else to pay for a war we never should have been in. And $1 trillion later, 10 years later, we still are spending tens of billions of dollars there. Now, some corporations, some others made a lot of money. We didn't. And then we spent another 8 or 9 years we shouldn't have been in Afghanistan doing the same thing, borrowed the money for those. So it seems that our soldiers pay the great burden. American people pay the great burden. But boy, some made out like bandits. And I don't want any lectures from those who gave the bandits their bag of gold. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, after 6.5 months, it appears that the Congress may finally be able to finish the fiscal year 2011 appropriations process. Earlier today, the House passed the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill, which includes an extension of the current continuing resolution through the end of the fiscal year. If the Senate passes this bill and the President signs it, we'll be able to close the books on this issue and focus our attention on the budget for fiscal year 2012. In reflecting upon how we got here, Madam President, I want to point out to my colleagues that the fundamental reason we find ourselves debating a continuing resolution today is because 1 year ago, the Congress was unable to agree upon a budget resolution. The failure to reach a consensus agreement on the budget meant that the Appropriations Committee was asked to resolve these differences in spending itself. After months of attempting to do so, the committee was unable to bridge the gap between the Republicans and the Democrats. When the committee finally adopted the funding level proposed by Republicans, a hostile political environment crippled the committee's effort to enact a bipartisan budget plan. As we go forward, I would ask all of my colleagues to think carefully about this, and I urge everyone to cooperate, both here in the Senate and with our colleagues in the House. If we can fashion a compromise budget agreement this year, It might allow our committee to restore the bipartisan working relationship which has long been the hallmark of the committee for generations, and I sincerely hope that that will be the case. In some respects today, we can take that first step. The bill that we are considering reflects a bipartisan agreement reached among the leadership of the House and Senate and the White House, with the details being worked out by committees on appropriations. It's a very tough measure that cuts domestic spending more than I'm comfortable with, but it is dramatically superior to the alternative passed by the House 2 months ago, and equally superior to not passing any extension through the end of the year. In total, the measure reduces government spending $78.5 billion below the President's request. It is nearly $40 billion below the enacted level for FY 2010. Never before have we cut our appropriated funding so drastically. By far and away, this is the largest one-year cut from the President's budget request in our nation's history. The bill cuts all categories of spending: defense, international and domestic, discretionary and mandatory. While some of my colleagues will argue that the Department of Defense was let off the hook, others will probably say that the bill cuts more than defense than is prudent. Including military construction, the Defense Department's budget is reduced $20 billion below the President's request. In comparison to the FY 2010 enacted funding, the Department's budget is approximately $2 billion below a freeze, with military construction down by more than $6 billion and the rest of defense increasing by more than $4 billion. The priority in this defense bill is first and foremost to ensure that we treat our military personnel and their families fairly. That means a 1.4% pay raise. It means fully funding health care, but it also means ensuring that our forces have the proper equipment and the funding necessary to operate it. While funding is austere, the bill includes important enhancements such as buying more missiles for our Aegis missile defense ships, more helicopters for search and rescue operations, and medical evacuation in Afghanistan. It means investing in new technologies at a faster rate than requested, purchasing more drones to find and wipe out terrorists, and ensuring the safety of our soldiers and Marines by accelerating the purchases of safer Stryker vehicles and AMRAAMs. Accomplishing this while at the same time reducing defense spending has been a challenge. But working with our colleagues in the House, we have put together a plan which fulfills all of these objectives. But, Mr. President, this bill isn't just about defense. For the State Department and foreign assistance, we are providing $8 billion less than was requested. This low level of funding was the most we could get our colleagues in the House to agree with, and it means many important programs will have to be reduced. We won't be able to make as much progress in fighting AIDS and hunger. We won't have as much funding as I would like to support our operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, but considering the budget situation we face, we will have to make do. It is in the area of domestic spending in which the bill makes the most serious reductions, with the total included being approximately $50 billion below the President's request. In achieving this rate of savings, this compromise measure sought out as many different ways to reduce spending as possible to allow us to preserve our critically important priorities. We were able to mitigate the damage by looking at areas where we could identify savings from mandatory spending and by reducing lower priority funds. In total, domestic discretionary spending is cut by $38.3 billion, while mandatory spending comes down by $17.7 billion. Madam President, many programs had to be cut to reach these levels. In health care, in education, in housing, in infrastructure. But this bill is much better than the approach adopted by the House in H.R. 1. For example, we're able to fully fund Head Start, restoring the House Republican cut of $1.4 billion, which would have denied 218,000 children an opportunity to learn. We provided $30.7 billion for NIH, $1.4 billion more than the House Republicans. We provided $2.1 billion for food safety than the Republican plan. In energy, housing, our national parks, our transit programs, in every area we forced the House to back away from the unwise cuts which would have devastated the progress we are making to restore the economy and protect our people. Crazy ideas like furloughing Social Security workers and shutting off food inspections were turned around. But there's more to this story. The House bill wasn't just about dangerous and drastic cuts. It was also an attempt to legislate terrible social policy on a must-pass emergency spending bill. Here, too, we turned them around. Nearly a dozen provisions to overturn health care reform were rejected. 11 riders to gut the Environmental Protection Agency were rejected. Provisions to eliminate successful programs like needle exchanges and cooperation on public broadcasting were denied. Their attempts to rewrite gun laws and net neutrality were rejected. Madam President, it is true and regrettable that we had to accept limited provisions affecting the District of Columbia on abortion and school vouchers. We are not happy about that. Still, in comparison to what the House wanted to do, this bill is an enormous improvement even for the District of Columbia. As in any compromise, neither party to the agreement is happy with every item in the bill. Some on the other side would have preferred more cuts in domestic programs, while most members on our side believe we have cut our domestic priorities too deeply. But this is truly a bipartisan bill. When it is approved, it will be the most significant legislation to pass the Congress this year. Madam President, I believe this bill provides a roadmap on how we can continue to work across party lines to achieve what is necessary for the country. Yesterday, the President unveiled his long-range strategy to reduce the deficit. His approach is extremely different than the approach of the House Republicans. In 2 weeks, our Senate Budget Committee will unveil its plan on regaining fiscal control. It is not overstating the case to say that it is truly a matter of urgent national security that we reach across party lines and conclude an agreement with our colleagues in the House to regain control over our government's finances. Both parties feel strongly about their recommendations and the structure of future budgets. The philosophical divisions are wide. But as I watched the President's speech, I thought about this continuing resolution and how we are able to bridge a huge divide between the houses and the political parties. Because of this experience, I became more optimistic that we can find a way to work with our House colleagues and come up with a deficit reduction plan that would represent all of our best efforts to act in the country's interest. Madam President, today is vitally important that we take that first step towards putting our fiscal house in order by adopting this bill. It is also critical that the Congress demonstrate that it can act in the spirit of compromise and in the national interest. This bill represents a fair compromise which will meet our country's needs, and I urge all of my colleagues to support it. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.